is it even worth it? Because it could be an awesome thing to do, but it's going to get you this much increase. So like, just because you can doesn't mean you should.
It's about how are we retaining people? How are we growing our business overall? That isn't just PPC, not just about putting money into your Facebook ads.
Like, I've never seen a small company, maybe one person doing growth, do a bunch of things well. It's always like, pick a couple.
Your channels are chosen by your business model, the product that you have, or the team that you have,
Does this make sense right now, given all of the factors we have? Is this the right time? Is a huge question.
It's all about prioritization, because you really need to be able to prioritize very ruthlessly.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Growth Mentor Live. Today we are covering how to avoid growth traps and how to answer that age-old question, should we add another growth channel right now? I'm Micah McGuire, head of content here at Growth Mentor, and today I am joined by Hannah Parvaz, founder at Aperture, and Lisa Kennelly, global product marketing strategist at Klarna. So guys, this is going to be an absolutely info-packed session today. I highly suggest grabbing your note-taking materials because Lisa and Hannah have plenty of experience and you are not going to want to miss learning from a second of it. We are going to have a Q&A, but it is going to be at the end of the session. So please, if at any time during the session you have questions, throw those in the chat and I will be grabbing them and we will get to as many as we can during our Q&A at the end. And finally, yes, there will be a recording available, so you guys will have that in your inboxes next week after our video editor has worked her magic on it. All right, Hannah, Lisa, I think that is all of my housekeeping handled. It is awesome to have both of you here today, and I am going to go ahead and hand the floor to you guys.
Thank you so much, Micah.
Thank you. So before we get started, I assume people know roughly what we do and why we're here, but Hannah, will you explain who you are? What's your background with growth? Why should we listen to you?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Lisa, and thank you so much, Micah. It's lovely to see you on stage, and also for Foti for having a little stage invasion there. I'm Hannah. My initial background originally was in the music industry, and somehow I got from music to tech through some music apps. And over the last kind of 12-ish years, I've been running growth inside various companies. So I've been working a lot with companies pre-launch or very early in their journey, scaling them up to millions and millions of people using the product. I've been doing a lot of kind of coaching and consulting over the last 7-ish years, starting with in 2017, I started coaching for Google. In 2018, I started mentoring on Growth Mentor. And then in 2020, with someone wonderful in the chat here, Nopodon, and another wonderful guy, Matt Lerner, I joined the System program where I coach on growth, which is actually where I met you, Lisa. So would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Yes, for sure. So I am currently doing product marketing strategy at Klarna, which is a fintech based in Stockholm, which is where I am, but it is a global company. And I've been here for a couple of years. But previously, before that, I was working as the CMO and director of marketing for several mobile apps, startups that were in the scale-up phase. So I've led marketing teams, I've worked on growth, I've been on leadership teams, I've done that whole song and dance. And yeah, I've been coaching in System as well, which is a growth program a 10-week growth program for teams who want to also unlock their growth levers. And I've been doing that for the last 3 years. And I've also been on Growth Mentor since 2021, because one of the reasons is that it's very interesting to see how everyone is trying to find like how to unlock growth, what are my growth channels? And having been through that journey myself and had a lot of learnings, challenges, pitfalls, it's valuable to both give back and also see how people are solving that problem today. So yeah, I guess why are we here? Why are we here talking about this today? Why is our topic, avoiding the growth traps, right? It's We come from a place of failures and mistakes. So like, why are we talking about this today?
Well, as we said, you and I, Lisa, have been coaching together for about 3 years now. And over that time, every single time we get together, this is a hot topic for us. Actually, when we were thinking about the topic for this conversation, we were like so excited because of how many people come and talk to us about this. We're always talking about prioritization. We're always talking about stakeholder management. We're always talking about how to expand your channels. And we're also always talking about what actually is growth because even now there's a huge kind of misconception that it's one thing when people are just thinking it's all kinds of things. Sometimes we're hearing like, a growth person does UA, a growth person does product, a growth person does all kinds of random things. A growth person, just buys media or sends emails, or it's something that's measurable. But I don't want to get too ahead of myself with talking about this, because I know we're going to go quite deep into this topic. So I don't want to reveal too much early on. So I'll pass back to you, Lisa. I'll boomerang that back, but with, what was it that excited you about this topic as well?
Yeah, I think it's like you said, it's often the question comes in like on Growth Mentor or in another session I'm doing or at other companies, like, okay, hey, we've been going through this way and I want to move to this channel, like, and they want an answer that's yes or no. Like, should I do that? And usually, actually, like, that's not what people are asking for help about. They think they're asking for help with, should I pick this channel? And what they're actually asking is, how do I grow? That's been my experience. I mean, would you say that's similar for you?
100%. Yeah, I think there's a lot of the time there's this pressure from some people who sit on a board which say like, pour money on, like increase your acquisition, when acquisition isn't all that growth is. It's not just about putting money into your Facebook ads or doing something top of funnel. Like, growth is actually even deeper down in your funnel. Like, how does your company grow? Like, it's not just conversion, and this is something I've been thinking about a lot lately. Like, everything that we do is conversion a lot of the time. How do we get them to that sale as quickly as possible? How do we get them to that trial as quickly as possible? Especially like Lisa and I both work in mobile and spend a lot of our time thinking about mobile apps, where it's all about optimizing this first 2 minutes, right? And so a lot of the time people get into their head that growth is acquisition for this first 2 minutes of conversion, but actually no, I don't, and I don't think we see it in that way at all. It's about, how are we retaining people? How are we growing our business overall? And that isn't just PPC, Lisa.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think it's like the question comes, we need to grow. Therefore, it must be, we're already growing on Meta. We want to grow via TikTok. Like, and that's where the conversation's happening, when really it should be, okay, we're growing from this way. Can we keep growing this way? Is where we need to focus to actually unlock our growth somewhere else in our funnel. Because I found from my experience, adding a new channel is rarely the obvious or correct solution. Would you say has that been your experience as well?
Well, adding a new acquisition channel.
Exactly. Acquisition. Yeah. I think that's the point. Because when we talk about channels, I just made that same mistake, right? I think acquisition, but like, channels of growth are not always at the top of the funnel. Would be another way to put that.
Absolutely. You can have, I would see CRM as a growth channel. Like, that can help us grow our audience. Like, that can help us with getting people to reactivate. That can help us with winning back, which will be things that grow our business. It's things that we can experiment on. And, what I'm really trying to kind of understand with them is like, not just which channel I can use, but how can we grow your company? And there's so many different layers here. How are we activating our customer? How are we retaining our customer? And like you just said there, like, we need to kind of get out of growth channel means acquisition channel. But do you have any other thoughts on that? And then we can go deeper into I know I've got something very exciting to ask you.
Yeah, no. Go for it. We'll come back to it. What do you want to ask me?
I just know that whenever we get together, Lisa, I always am hearing some of the things that you've been working on behind the scenes in Growth Mentor, in the companies that we coach together. I know that you're an expert. You're probably the best stakeholder manager that I've met. I want to know, like, and have you share some tips, because a lot of the times what happens is, and what we kind of have what we're doing diluted by, is a founder coming over or a CEO coming over and saying, I've just read this blog post. I just listened to this podcast, and now why aren't we on Pinterest? Like, why aren't we doing ads on Reddit? How do you combat that? Not combat, that's the wrong word, but how do you make them feel heard whilst trying to surface, that you're aware of the strategy, you've got something in mind, you're doing this, like, but how do you incorporate that if that is the right thing to do? Just talk me through that situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because I do think this is kind of, again, in the context of this, is like, we want to grow. Okay, where can we grow? Where did the idea that we need to grow come from? Where did this specific idea come from? And like you said, often that can come very top down or from the side, right? And so I think there's a few things. It's definitely understanding, like, where does the ask come from? What is the ask motivated by? How valid is it? How relevant is it? Because it's not like, oh God, this board member doesn't know what they're talking about. Like, I just have to like pawn them off somehow. Like sometimes there's valid info, right? And maybe it's a question I would often get at a past company was like, I've spoken to the CEO of a company that is similar to ours. It's a similar type of product. They're having a lot of success growing this way. Why aren't we using it? And it's a mix of both. Okay, let me understand what they're doing. Let me understand how actually similar to us they are. Can we actually grow in the same way? And also, is there, like, usually most of the time as a growth leader, you've considered that, right? There's only so many different ways to grow. And if you're a pretty comprehensive growth leader, you've considered most of them, hopefully, and you've made a conscious decision. Because there can also be that, like, yes, totally makes sense for us to grow in that way, to explore that channel of growth. We're not doing it right now because we don't have the resources. We don't have the data set up to do that effectively. We don't have the budget to do it effectively. So it's often a case of, I think it's rarely saying no. It's usually framing it as, this is the context into why we haven't done this so far or when we will do this. So I think it's working with stakeholder management for anything, and also with growth, it's usually a soft no and never a just like, nah, you're an idiot or whatever.
So what's the first thing you ask them usually?
I usually ask, like, explain to me your thinking and how do you see that as an opportunity for us?
And do you have an example of like sometime this has happened and how you've actually incorporated some of that?
Yeah, I think it's that's a really good question. I mean, for example, when I worked at Fishbrain, which is an app I worked at before, and we explored a lot with looking at how can we grow through partnerships, because we saw from other apps, maybe, they could grow through partnerships if you look at like who is above you in the chain, in the customer journey of reaching you, and they actually are most likely to interact with you through another larger partner. So when we saw that working for other different companies, that was something that we could say, okay, we can see how that would work and the numbers track. So let's run an experiment on that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, I mean, it's again, it's like anything. It's like, take it in, validate it, be able to understand in the big picture of how you grow and where the opportunity is. Does this make sense right now?
Mm-hmm.
But I think going on to that, I mean, like I just said, does this make sense right now? I think thinking about ways to grow, does this make sense right now, given all of the factors we have? Is this the right time to diversify? Is a huge question. Is that something, tell me how your perspective on that, like if someone comes to you and they say, hey, we want to explore growing in a new way, how do you validate that?
Well, I spend a lot of time talking to companies about this. And the first thing that I have to always say is, you do not get to choose your channels. Mm-hmm. Your channels choose you. Like, your channels are chosen by your business model or the product that you have or the team that you have. It's not that you can just fit into every single place at the same kind of level of effort. And growth for me comes from the place that it makes the most sense. So, for example, if you are, and I've worked on quite a few companies that are kind of category creating, like people are not looking for this stuff. So if you're a brand new concept that someone has never heard of, like, people are not going to be searching for this. So you don't want to invest in PPC at that stage. You need to create awareness for your product or for your solution. So what does that look like at that stage? Is that like a channel for that awareness could be PR, but it could also be awareness ad, not actually awareness ads, but like ads to raise awareness on Facebook or Instagram, on TikTok. Like, whenever I'm thinking about TikTok, I'm thinking about it more like an awareness channel as well. I'm not expecting very deep conversions from TikTok, right? Like I am from Meta. Mm-hmm. And so it really depends on what is the thing that makes the most sense, So you really need, in my perspective, to have, and probably in everyone's perspective, hopefully, you really need to have a deep understanding of how your business is operating. And I don't just mean on the surface, I mean at every level, because you really need to be able to prioritize very ruthlessly. So the optimal time for anything is, in my view, the time at which it's going to have the biggest impact on the numbers that you've got. And so it might not make sense. It might not have a big impact right now to add in another acquisition channel. Like the biggest impact thing that you could do for your company growth might be working on your retention. I worked with one app last year, and one of the things we were acquiring really well, it was good. But then whenever we got to day 30, people weren't sticking around, right? So what we did first before we started putting more people in at the very top and saying like, well, there's more people at the top, so there's more people at the bottom. We instead fixed retention, like we tripled our retention, and then we looked at activation and we built in some functions in activation, like at the very beginning, relating to streaks and things like this, where we literally doubled our activation and our retention retained. It stayed the same as we had been experimenting towards. And then at that point, we were then able to pour more money in. Like we were able to turn on more ads. We were able to spend more and scale because that's what made most sense, So whenever we're thinking about growth, it's really like, what is your North Star metric? And how are the elements that are leading up into that, like your key drivers, how are these operating? And which of these will have the biggest impact right now on your North Star metric to grow it? That's what I'm looking for. And that's how I'm deciding. So prioritization and clear metrics as well, like what I'm trying to impact there.
Yeah, I do think that is something that it can be very easy to feel like there's this checklist of like different channels of growth I know. I'm going to check off all the boxes. We got to have coverage in all those things, right? This idea that I need to diversify, and that fear of needing to diversify is like, oh no, if we're too dependent on one channel, then actually explore what are those fears? What are we worried that will happen? When in reality, like you said, one, they're not necessarily relevant to be on all of those places. Two, you might not have the resources to do it. And actually, three, if you actually look at the numbers and say, okay, best case scenario, if we were to let's say add new channel here and I add those numbers to my funnel, what is the actual output? Is it even worth it? Right? Like there's sort of the qualification check of like, yeah, this channel exists. Does it make sense for my business? Is this relevant to us? But then like, do the numbers even check out? Because it could be, yeah, it's an awesome thing to do, but it's going to get you this much increase. So like, just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Exactly. And on top of that, I think it's really important to understand if we're actually even maxing out what we're doing on our existing channels, which we haven't mentioned yet. Like,
totally.
If you're running on Meta, let's say, are you doing as much as you can on there, or are you just doing like a half-assed attempt at doing something, and then you're like, oh, it's that's going, but now let's launch on another channel. Like, I'm trying to, with my companies, get one thing right first, get that into a process, get that into a system, and then expand out from there. I'm coaching one company at the moment, and they want to focus on TikTok and Meta right at the same time. And I'm like, let's just focus on one, get that right first, let you understand the process here. And then once we have, and once you're comfortable, and once we're seeing results that we're happy with, we can take the learnings and then expand to TikTok. Like, it's fine. I'd rather us nail one than do two in a longer amount of time,
Absolutely.
And on top of that, like, do we have these, for these companies, it's related to this, like, do they have the capacity to truly max out these channels? So just in that example with TikTok, you need a lot more creatives on TikTok than you do on Meta, or not necessarily a lot more, but like a lot more effort, because on Meta you can create. Now I'm talking about acquisition a lot, I know, but like we'll go back a bit deeper later. But this is just a very clear example. Like on Meta, you can just create static images, and that's actually, no surprises here, a lot less involved than going and making loads and loads of UGC. And so if you're wanting to then launch on TikTok, or a company I'm working with wants to launch on TikTok, do you have the capacity to produce that much UGC? Like, are you going to even be able to account for that? Because otherwise you're going to go on there and it's just going to be hard. Like, you're just not going to be able to get any of the results, because you're not going to be able to put enough effort into there. So you have to balance out all of these things. Like, do you have the capacity, and what's your goal with expanding as well?
Yeah. And I was going to say, like, we mentioned, like, are you maxing out the channel? Have you ever seen a company truly max out a channel, and what would that look like? What does that look like when one does?
Have I seen companies max out channels? Yeah. There's maxing out a channel, and then there's maxing out for the awareness that you have on a channel as well. And I think this is an important thing to balance. And this does not mean, by the way, I'm saying go and spend loads of money on awareness ads. But what I'm saying is, at some point, if there is no if there's no comprehension of your product, if there's no awareness of what you're doing, if your messages are super niche, you're going to eat up, let's say, I know we're talking about acquisition more, but like you're going to eat up all of those kind of people that the algorithm is targeting very early on with those messages. So if you're not expanding out, if you're not focusing on enough benefits, if you're not focusing on enough differentiated messages, then you can max it out with what you're doing, and you can max out your spend, and your spend can become much less efficient. But a lot of the times I'm going into companies' accounts, and I took over one of company's accounts last year, right? And they said, we've maxed it out. We're trying to expand onto multiple channels. We're across 3 at the moment. And actually, when I got onto their meta, they were running 142 campaigns. It made my eyebrows do that as well. They were running 142 campaigns, and then thinking that that was maxed out, and thinking now we've got to go onto TikTok and Google search, YouTube and display. And I was like, can we just rewind a little bit? Like, we consolidated down to 4 campaigns on Meta. Like, that was all, including testing. And within 3 months, they'd reached profitability for the first time ever in their life cycle. So it's just a balance of these different things, you know? What about you? Have you seen any companies maxing it out?
It's a really good question when I think about, like, I generally, I mean, obviously I work at quite a larger company now, but even still, I mean, I wouldn't say at a company that we're 4,000 people and, you know, around the world, I don't think maxing out channels is the problem, right? I do think it's much more around focusing and where do we put our energy and effort. And so I think that there's this perception in growth, for whatever reason that it comes from, that like you have to diversify or you need to be on these different places, when really it's so much better to do fewer things effectively rather than a bunch of things half-assed, as you said. Like, I've never seen anyone, and especially a small company, maybe one person doing growth, do a bunch of things well. It's always like pick a couple and do them really well and really understand it.
And when you're a small company, like when you were at a smaller company than you're at now, what are some of the things that you would recommend starting with?
Starting with in what sense?
In, let's say I'm a new head of growth, new stage company, where would you be focusing for a mobile consumer product, for example?
So I would, obviously, as we talked about, look at our existing growth model. How are we growing? Where are the numbers, right?
What's a growth model?
We talked a little growth model, right? A growth model is, what's your North Star metric? What's the number that shows you're actually delivering value to your end user? And what are the levers within that you can move to move that number upwards? Like, how do you actually grow? How does your growth work? And I think, especially if you're going in, let's say, like, to make this a little bit concrete, and let's say if I am at the point we validated we should try a new growth channel, right? Let's say all of these caveats we've been saying aside, which are like really, really probably you don't need to grow a different way, but we've established that we should. How do you then think about that? So like, okay, enough validation that yes, this new channel of growth makes sense. Like, how to think about that? I think, like, for me, it's, again, what are we trying to impact? What are the metrics? Do I have the tools in place to do it? And also, what is the time frame? Because there are some ways to grow that take longer than others. And that's going to depend a lot on, like, what's your runway as a company? What's the expectations as a business from whoever you're reporting to in terms of when performance is going to happen? Because SEO can be a great growth channel, but that's not going to happen quick. So it can be great for you, but if they're like, hey, we need to see results in 3 months or we're out of money, maybe I would go for something different. At the same time, you know, you have to give channels or whatever channel of growth a fair shot, right? So like, what's a realistic time frame to see improvement based on the resources you're able to put into it? So that's the way that I would approach it when it's actually like, okay, we validated, like, yes, this is something new to try. Is that your approach, or do you do something different?
Whenever we're thinking about which new channels and what is our next growth initiative, really, like, I'm looking at, firstly, there isn't a one-size-fits-all answer to this, by the way. You know, all I can say is that before we're doing anything, we are outlining what does success look like. We're outlining what are our goals. We want to understand our KPIs. We want to understand what is the metric that I'm trying to impact, and what are the levers that I have to impact it. And then, as you said, the time frame is extremely important. So we have to really start with also determining a realistic time frame. for this. So we have to take all of this into consideration. So let's say then the thing that I'm trying to impact is activation, right? There are so many different ways to do this. So we always start then with a big brainstorm around what are the things that we can do to impact our activation. So we have an ideation session. We get together, we do a big brainstorm, and then we start prioritizing these things, right? Like go through all of these different things and say, which of these do we think will have the highest impact and will have the lowest effort? And whenever we are doing this, actually, usually we kind of score them, on an effort and impact scale. And the ones that have the highest scores, which are the ones which are the lowest effort and highest impact, we can just call our low-hanging fruit. And these are the ones that we pick off first, go eat those blueberries. And then after that, there might be things which are going to be high impact, but they're also high effort. And some of these channels or some of these things, by the way, I would consider adding any acquisition channel that's an ongoing thing as the highest effort, because it's ongoing and it's never going to end. You're going to go to bed thinking about it. Like it's forever, like until you decide to stop it. Like, but if you start running meta ads, like you're going to get addicted to that. And then you're going to keep on running that. It's not like often companies are just running them for a month or something, or occasionally, yeah, you're like boosting a little bit, but if you're relying on that as an acquisition channel, that's it. So for me, it's all about prioritization, as we started the whole conversation talking about that. Prioritization, defining what metrics are you trying to impact with this, and then looking at which things, based on all of the ideas that we have, all of the concepts that we have, which of these things, which of these initiatives is going to have the highest impact. And so this is really how we think about like what can be our new channel, like our new growth channel, from my side, and whenever we're thinking about it from an Aperture perspective too. Yeah.
Can you share some examples from your experience of how, okay, so we've gotten to this point, we've said, yes, we validated a channel, we've done our prioritization, we're testing something, and it didn't perform as we expected. Have you been in that kind of situation, and how did you handle it when that happened?
That we've validated it and then it didn't perform as we expected.
Yeah.
You told me a very good story about this when we were preparing, so I want you to share your story.
Was first. This about influencer marketing?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so yeah, this is a story. Maybe some of you heard this before, but when I was working at an app before called Clue, which is in the female health space, and this is like 10 years ago, so back at the dawn of influencer marketing, and we got this really strong signal that influencer marketing was a good channel for us. And the reason we got that signal was because one day out of nowhere, we got like 50,000 downloads out of the blue when our baseline was like 15 or something. So it's just spike out of nowhere. Where did this come from? We have no idea. Check everywhere. Finally asked somebody via customer support, and they said, oh yeah, this YouTuber mentioned you in her YouTube video. Went to the YouTube video, 8 million subscribers, like one of the biggest in the world, talked about us for 8 seconds, unpaid. We're like, wow, maybe this influencer thing is something that's an opportunity. So then we tried to go and like scale that up and replicate it, right? And by being like, okay, what if we pay this person for like talk about us? And like, it didn't perform perfectly, right? Because we actually had to really crack, how do you professionalize this? How do you give them the talking points? How do we actually calculate the return in a way if we're actually paying for this? So I think it was like, absolutely the channel made sense. It was 100% like, it was very clearly validated the performance of it, but the execution of how we could actually work on it was much more complicated, and that took a long time to work, and a lot of very smart people, not myself, working on that to sort of, be able to scale it up and make it an efficient, ongoing thing as opposed to a one-off.
Mm-hmm. I think there's a really important part of you validated something, but it's all still about the execution of what happens afterwards. And so I was working with one company, and we had validated using meme pages to grow on Instagram, for example. And we started a partnership with this one meme page that had 30 million followers, really high engagement. Like its average posts were getting like literally hundreds of thousands, like 500,000 likes, 1 million likes on some of the posts, like so much engagement. And we did our first post on there. It performed quite well. It was kind of campaign based. And then the founder, we basically started running another campaign, which was an SEO campaign, but was driving a lot of traffic to our website. And it was about quitting social media. And I was like, I think that this is the perfect thing to post on this meme page. You know, we validated meme pages. We know that things are going to work there. And the founder was saying, I don't think that people who want to quit social media are on social media, which, yeah, they are.
Yes, we are.
They haven't quit yet. And so anyway, that was what our campaign was basically. And the founder said, you know, we're not posting about quit social media on this meme page because it will be a waste. You know, I just want to post a brand message. And, you know, we'd validated meme pages, but that doesn't necessarily mean that every single post you do on that page is going to be effective if it's the wrong message. So we did our post, our brand message, and wow, it got, bearing in mind this page is usually getting 500,000 likes. It got about 5,000 likes. It was really bad. Like the engagement was absolutely terrible. Usually there's literally thousands of comments. There was like 5 comments. It was not good. And so this was something that, you know, we'd proven out that these pages are working, but then what we did didn't work. And so then I had to basically go in with my tail between my legs and say to the people running the page, like, please, sir, can you delete the post and let us repost? And I said to the founder, if they'll let us delete this and repost it for free with this quit social media message, are you down to try this then? And they agreed. So they deleted it and it was all fine. Like the quit social media post went up. And then this post got about over 100,000 people visiting our website. The study that we were running had about 250,000 people apply to take part in the study. And actually, not all from that post, but a big chunk of it. And we actually gained from that post only 26,000 followers on Instagram. So anyway, this is a story just to say, sometimes you validated something, but then the execution of what you do isn't completely right as well. And so how do you kind of get around that? So that it just leads on from your kind of influencer story there.
No,
as well.
exactly.
Maybe what you're doing that isn't necessarily the right execution for that moment and that channel and the language and things like that. So
right, because I think there's one other thing I want to say, and then I want to get to some of the questions that I know people are putting in, which we haven't talked about as much, which is funny because it's all we think about is like, where is the customer in all this, right? And like, what is the customer journey? Does this make sense from a customer point of view? So like when you're thinking about, you know, what am I trying to do with these various channels? How is my customer behaving on them? What is their mindset in each of those points and on those different channels? And is my messaging aligned to all of those things, right? So it's like, on the one hand, and some of this you have to validate and test, just, you know, the content in one place can work on another channel, but maybe it won't, because actually that's not what their mindset is when they're on that channel.
Exactly.
So that's, I think, like,
it's true. And also
it's not just copy and paste.
Think about your own mindset, like whenever you're on these different channels. I go to TikTok for a different reason than I go to Facebook. I only go to Facebook whenever my mum texts me saying I didn't like her post. And I'm like, which post? You know, I don't open it, right? And if I do, then I get sucked into watching videos about Zendaya or something like that. Like whenever I'm on Instagram, I'm going on there to catch up with what my friends are doing. Whenever I'm going onto TikTok, actually my algorithm is all like educational content. So I open that one to learn. So like, what mindset are you in on these different platforms? And think about what people's mindset is on these different platforms if we're thinking about things from an acquisition perspective.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I think, I mean, one other thing I just wanted to bring up is that, like, we've mentioned a couple, I guess you could call them failures or kind of key learning moments. Like, are there any other common mistakes that you've seen companies make when they're going through this Diversify thing? I know we've talked about a lot of like, don't do this, but any other specific mistakes you see?
I'd say the 2 big ones, and then I'll let you say if you have any as well. But my 2 big ones are, one, whenever a lot of the time I see companies, we tried this, we tried that, but they didn't actually outline in advance what does success look like. So actually writing a hypothesis, you know, actually saying this is what I think will happen, and if this happens, then I will deem this successful. If it gets to here, then we will do this. Like, think about it in advance, you know, don't just kind of do things, like make a plan. Like, that's number 1. And then my number 2 is just related to this in a way, like learning from your failures. So a lot of the times people do things and then they don't learn. Like, what is it that you can take away from that experience? And that isn't just about your growth initiatives, but that's just in life, you know. A couple of years ago, I had a pretty bad fall And I just thought, okay, I've learned that is not a stable step. And you just have to think about it from that perspective, because I used to feel bad about something if I did something wrong, but now it's just, what can you learn from that? So those are my big two that I keep seeing over and over again. Companies doing something, not learning from it, trying the same thing essentially again, not learning from it, so that, and then making sure that everyone is communicating about these things. So if you have a learning, share that with your team. Don't expect someone to just implicitly know that thing if you haven't shared it explicitly. So any failures, mistakes, any mistakes?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think one that I sort of touched on a bit, but is benchmarking against other companies in an unhelpful way. So like these people, like I said, this company who's totally the same as us is growing this way. Why aren't we? Spoiler, like no company is identical, or most companies are not. So you're probably not growing exactly the same way. There's nuances to why they're growing that way. So that's one. But also at the same time, like knowing what to copy and what to leave from other people doing the same thing. Because on the one hand, there's only so many ways to grow, but you are a special snowflake as a company. So what's the balance there? That's one. And then I do think also, like you said, it's the setting expectations of what we're trying to achieve and demystifying growth for everyone who needs to know, right? Because that is going to help you in the long run. If everyone in your company understands how we're trying to grow, here's how we think about growth, here's how we're looking at growth. It's a lot of like internal communication and internal education, right? Because that is, it's like, oh, God, I have to go tell people how this stuff works. But like, they actually don't know. Like, people haven't had experience with this, or maybe they were growing a company 10 years ago and it was a little bit different. So the more you can bring everybody on the growth journey with you, that's going to have better outcomes for everybody involved. As opposed to just like, growth is my responsibility, I'm head of growth, no one touch me. That's not going to work.
I'd love to hear how you bring everyone on the growth journey with you, but I'll share what I've done before. And I was working at a company where if you said the G word, literally the head of brand would almost vomit into her mouth. Like, you could not say growth, because anything that you would say back, anything you'd say, well, this is for growth, it was just anything. The opinion that the head of brand had was that anything that growth do is just putting like women's butts on things to make people click. And it's not. That's not what it is, right? So we had to just eliminate the word growth from the vocabulary, number one. Number two, what I did at that company was I sat down with every single person. It was a small company. It wasn't 4,000 people, but I sat down with 15 people and took every single person through a deck about what is growth. I started with the CTO, because he was someone that said these literal words to me once: "We do not believe in validation at this company." And I was like, okay, let's just understand what that means. So we sat down and went through a deck. This is how we experiment. This is how we validate, yada, yada, yada. Then design, and then content, and then developers. And I took through every single person until then it was everyone talking to the founders about it. And so this is a way that I've kind of tried to get everyone on the same side, and also get everyone working together, and also get everyone using a shared language, a similar language, which I find really beneficial. But what have you tried?
Yeah, I think there's two things that I tend to do, which is put questions back on people and ask them to make them think about this, because maybe they just haven't. Depending on the company, there can be a lot of culture of just like do, don't necessarily think. And so like, before we do anything, can we think about it? And how far back can we challenge the assumptions we have here? So I think that's one way to do it. And then also just looking at the numbers. Because people can get very, very attached to like the specific thing they're working on, which is great, and they have a lot of pride in it. But actually, in the big system of things, if you look at your growth and where it's coming from, the possible impact it can have, like, might not actually be the biggest lever. So, okay, let's understand, where does growth actually come from? Because I don't know about you, I want to be working on the thing that is going to grow like the most exciting way. Like, where's the biggest opportunity? I want to work on that. I don't want to work on something that's only going to move the needle a little bit. People generally want to they want to flock to where the action is. So show them where the action is.
I definitely want to flock to where the action is.
You want to flock to where the action is. I wonder if there's people in the chat who want to flock to where the action is. That's my segue.
We'll invite Micah back, but just before we end, Lisa, do you have one piece of advice for everyone watching? Like, what's one key takeaway that everyone can write down and try out, this week or next week? It's Thursday.
Okay, I would say, if I had one thing you do, I would say map your entire growth journey, your customer journey, from like before they even know you exist to when they even realize it's a problem. Map out your entire growth journey, and then think about, really honestly with yourself, how good are we? at all of those stages, and where is the place where actually we really need to focus? Because I would bet you might be focusing on the wrong place of that customer journey for growth. What about you?
I would say ideate and prioritize. Be very, very ruthless with your prioritization, especially if you're a small team. If you're thousands and thousands of people, you don't need to have every single person in your business focusing on one thing, right? But as a small team, or sometimes a solopreneur, or you're working on your own, or you're trying to change the way in which your team is operating, be ruthless with your prioritization and really understand exactly why you're doing something. So outlining what your metrics are and prioritize based on that would be my key takeaway from this.
I very much agree with you about that. Micah, do you have some questions for us that we not only just rattled on for 45 minutes?
Hey, we have got a few for sure. I guess the first one is, and you guys kind of hit on part of this with defining growth, but how does that work together with the other aspects of, say, like product marketing and I guess the quote unquote traditional marketing function, and I guess even brand? Because Hannah, I think that mention of the head of brand really hating that word growth really kind of hit home for me. So I guess how do you make the growth stuff work with everybody else in the marketing side, and is there a product side to that as well?
I'm going to let Lisa take this because she's the chief of everything product marketing at the moment. So go ahead.
Right. Which, I mean, I have a whole thing about how I think product marketing is just growth marketing by another name, because I used to be a growth marketer and then I'm a product marketer and I do the same thing. I think it goes back to, does everybody understand how their work connects to growing the business, right? Growth, growing the business. Like, we're all in a business to, I would assume, make money, make the business keep existing. And if your work you are doing cannot connect to that, like, how do you find meaning in what you're doing? Maybe that's more of a philosophical question, but understanding, like, brand is important for growth, right? Like 100%. I mean, we work with one of the best brand growth people in the business. And, it's not that stuff is at odds with each other. And I think that's completely untrue. You're having a really strong brand is critical for growth. So it's understanding, how does the work I'm doing on brand, for example, fit into that? How does the work I'm doing on product, how does this product help us grow? I mean, I've been definitely in a situation where, you build a product, great, and then it's like, hey, marketing, take this. And it's like, wait a minute, like, why were we not involved from the beginning? Why aren't we thinking together about how to make this contribute?
Yeah.
What about you, Hannah?
And hashtag not all product managers, but enough of them that it's become a thing where a lot of the times product managers, not all of them, don't come from me, but like are not actually finding out why someone is using their product. I saw, and I use this as an example all the time for a product person versus a growth person, is that I saw a product person doing this big post about how finding out how someone uses your product is the most important thing that you can do in a business. Mm-hmm. And I was like, God, this is so off the mark, because finding out why someone is using your product is the most important thing that you can do as a business. It's not how, why is someone using it? Because then you build your whole experience around the why, not around the how. Like, anyone can do a how, however, but like, if you want to do a how, it's how are you tapping into the why? Mm-hmm. So this is a big thing. And also on top of that, if you're building a feature, just like Lisa said, related to brand or product marketing or whatever, if you're a product person and you're building a feature, how is this feature working to grow the business? So whenever I've been in companies, growth has been the umbrella for product and marketing. So growth has run product and marketing, because then they get to be friends. They're not siloed, and we want them to be interconnected. That's it. It's not typical. At least it wasn't at the beginning, and it's strange to me when it's so siloed that product is just running off on its own, doing its own thing. We know someone who's working at a company, and they're a mobile app. Their last product release was over a year ago, because they were working on. I know, me too. That's my exact expression. And their last product release was over a year ago because they've been working on a new feature, and it's the product people. And I asked, have they spoken to anyone? No. They hadn't. They're just going around in their own little circles chasing their tails because they haven't been speaking to people. They're not kind of just releasing and getting things out there and learning. They're just going off their own opinions and then arguing about it for a literal year. So anyway, that's a long way of saying everything should be done to grow the business, and it should be working on the highest priority things at the time. And so let's say that our highest priority area at the moment is acquisition. It's top of funnel. What can you as a product person do to help acquisition? Stop building this like random feature that you just think is nice and start thinking about like, okay, like how am I building in a share functionality? How am I building in referral? Like how am I doing these things that can help the most important area in my business at the moment? Not just, this feels nice to me, which is, don't come for me, product people, but that is a lot of the time what happens.
So basically, it sounds like it's a lot less to do with how each function fits together and a lot more to do with everybody needs to be playing nicely and being aligned.
Very good summary.
All right, great. So we have another one that is kind of about what do you do when your abilities are being outpaced by either how fast the company ideally needs to grow or by how fast they're growing. Let's say, you hit a growth channel and basically it just takes off. How do you keep up your skills in a way basically so you can keep up with the growth rate, essentially? And this is coming from a SEO person, so if that helps.
Do you want to take this, Hannah?
I don't really understand the question 100%. So it's how do I keep up my skills? How do I keep on learning at a fast enough rate? That's a really hard one because everything's evolving so quickly now that like sometimes I'm even like scrambling to like figure things out. Lisa and I are always talking about apps, so I'm just going to use an app example here. You might have heard of the SK Ad Network, everyone watching, but if you have not, that's a lovely attribution model that Apple made to make everyone's lives really fun and create some fun new hoops to jump through. And they're releasing continuously elements of this, and it's hard to stay on top of everything. So what I'm literally doing now is using AI to teach me. So I don't know if everyone's using Perplexity yet. If you're not, type that into Google, and then you'll never have to Google anything again. And Perplexity is like ChatGPT plus Google, but it cites everything. So the other month, I was trying to figure out like about Scan 4.0, like what do coarse-grained and fine-grained values mean, and how do these impact my attribution models and things like this. And I was trying to read all of these articles and I couldn't figure it out. And I just went into Perplexity and I was asking like, and it really taught me, I understand the whole concept. I understand everything around that now because I was just able to ask like, but what does that actually mean, and have that explain it to you. So there are these shortcuts that you can take. I would say automate everything that you can as well. Like once you've built a process, automate it or hire someone to automate who can take over it from you. Like one thing I do when I'm in a company is I build out processes and then I bring someone in to take over that process once it's validated. So from an SEO perspective, for example, in my last in-house company, I identified that there was a really big opportunity around SEO, around content marketing, around getting blog posts on our website. And so what I did was I built out a process around that, and I wanted us to get 100 posts live in a month to force it. And then I wanted to work with our devs on building out and programmatically generating landing pages for all of the content that we had. And so I built out this process, and we were saying at the beginning, SEO takes a long time. We 6x'd our traffic, organic traffic, within like a month by doing this. I know, but anyway, we did a really I got this process going and then built it all out like in Airtable, and then hired someone to take it over. And then she understood the process, and I said, you're a process person, optimize this. You just need to contact this person. Here's how you do the keyword research, and then teach them from that perspective. So if you're finding like you're doing too many things, or you're just doing repetitive things, like what's a way that you can either automate it or bring someone in to support you on that? And it doesn't need to be even a full-time hire. You can just bring in someone to help you with that task, for example. So that's what I would say. So automate what you can, use AI to educate yourself, and get the support where if you need it. And you can even find that on Upwork. Like, we outsource to Upwork for all kinds of things, like lead research and things like that, like that we're not doing internally. So, Lisa, what do you do to stay up to date?
Yeah, Perplexity is a great shout. Increasingly, I think, AI tools are, if you're using them right, they're so powerful for that. I do think communities like Growth Mentor, for example, the subclub community is amazing on the mobile side. I think on Reddit, obviously, there's a lot. Like, that doesn't feel very novel to say, but just like, actually, everyone is solving the same problems, because we talked about, like, on the one hand, your company is special, and the other time, there's only so many ways to grow. Everyone is basically trying to hack an ice sculpture out of the same block of ice. So, like, go talk to the person who's using a hammer and see how you're using, like, a chisel, and you guys together, I think, are going to, like, learn from each other, is the way I think about it.
I love that.
Yeah, that was my on the fly. But, like, like, other people are solving the same problem, so don't think you have to solve it in a vacuum, right? Like, educate yourself and then go say, hey, I'm trying this. I'm blocked on this. Are you also blocked on this? Because I guarantee they also are. I mean, Hannah, you and I, like, text all the time about stuff like this.
Exactly. And you don't need to reinvent the wheel. Like, you don't need to go back to the very beginning of time and figure everything out yourself. Like, what have other people done? And that's the foundation, Actually, there's a wonderful person called Jessica Pacheco, and she and I were messaging a little bit about, 10 years ago, everyone was like, don't copy anything. And now everything everyone does is copying. Like, I wrote a line of copy like 7 years ago, and now this is like the most stolen line of copy in the app world. And it's hilarious. Like, but I'm like, go for it, if that company's not using it, let the work live on. But you don't need to reinvent the wheel, I would say.
Okay. Great. So we have time for a couple of more questions. I don't want to take up too much of your time over the hour, because I'm sure we could probably talk about this 4 hours. So we've got one that may take up our last 5 minutes. We'll see. How do you draw the line between having to look at going ahead and validating versus going ahead and executing? Because our audience member here feels like it can be a constant swing between gambler syndrome versus not a right execution. So,
please.
Yeah, I think we definitely talk about this. We've talked about this recently, about the difference between, can I swear on this?
Go ahead.
Between hygiene and just fucking do it, right? So, like, like there's that. There's like, what is just hygiene? I have to do it. Just fucking do it. And then also, like, this is something I need to validate. Like, those are kind of the two things, right? And the example I often give is that if you're an e-commerce company and you think you need to run an experiment on if I should add filters on my search results, just do it. You don't need to run an experiment. If you're e-commerce, people want filters on their search results. Done. I saved you some time, right? So I think it's like looking at what is the best practice, what is the hygiene for your, for your category. Do those things. You don't need to validate them. If it's something that is based on a core assumption and you really can probe and understand, here is the assumption this is based on that we don't know and we don't feel confident about, we don't have enough of a signal. Like, we have a customer insight driving it. So that's the signal we want to investigate more. That's when I would validate it more. That's the way I think about it. What about you, Hannah?
Yeah, I would say, like, I've had some companies say to me, like, oh, it's an experiment for us to send out emails. It's not an experiment for you to send out emails. How you send out the emails is the experiment. The frequency with which you send the emails is the experiment. When they're going, what you're saying, the design of them. But the concept of sending an email to someone as a piece of marketing is not something you need to validate. Like, why do you think people are sending emails? So if you think about it from that perspective, like I said to a company once, like, if you need to have a sign up if you're trying to sell something, it's hygiene to have a button that lets people purchase. What are the things that allow someone to get to that point? The other things, what color it is not hygiene or things like this. But also what we're usually trying to do when we're thinking about experiments is have our revolutions and our evolutions. And so we have these two streams going all of the time where we're trying to figure out new things. Like, this is a new thing that we're trying to validate and test and expand, but it's the very beginning. And then we have other things that we've already got validated that we're now trying to evolve. So I try and split them as well. Like, you don't want to do too much of one or the other, but you need to have a few little revolutions as well as your evolutions, basically. And then whenever we're thinking about what is the area that we're trying to impact, I wouldn't, for example, be in the same month, even as a small business, trying to focus on activation and acquisition and having everyone in my business thinking about that. Focus on one thing. If you're feeling like there's too much going on, then refine your focus and go, and just to backtrack again, like ruthlessly prioritize, like what is the area that you can have the biggest impact at the moment? Is that optimizing something, or is it that you've got nothing left to optimize? I don't know if that can be the case, but then is there something new that you can be doing? Like, and for a really simple way of saying this is like, whenever we start running ads for any company, we start with a messaging test. That's a revolution. And then we start optimizing that. So we find a message that works, we take that message, and then we start evolving it. So we don't often go back to doing messaging tests and creative concepts again. We're not doing that every week, but every couple months we go back and we do a new ideation session. We've got new learnings. The market has shifted. So we do a brand new ideation session, and then we go back and start doing creative concept testing again, or messaging testing again. And so this is really how I'm thinking about it. Like, what is the biggest area for impact, and what else are we doing at the moment? Do we need to prioritize?
Okay, great. Because that also, I think, hits on a little bit one of our other questions, which was how do you go about validating your ideas and hypotheses? So I think that's a good way of looking at it, is that it's all iterative ultimately.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, validate always as simply as possible. Your very first level of validation can just be talking to people. Hello, like literally get on the phone with people. Don't send a survey if you can not. If you cannot send a survey, don't. And talk to people. Like literally, I've been out with trying to validate messaging or validate an app store listing or things like that. Validate a product feature, going out onto the street. Literally, I go out onto the street and I say to people, what does this mean? What's the most lo-fi thing that you can do? And then do something a bit bigger, send an email, do a false door test, which means like sending an email and putting a button that doesn't go anywhere just to see how many people engage with it. You don't need to build like an expensive, fancy bells and whistles thing to validate something, but all we want to do is get indicators. Are there glimmers of interest here? And that's what we're looking for. So, yeah.
Lisa, anything to add there?
Lisa?
No, I think you covered it. I want to be mindful of our time and everyone's time here.
Mm-hmm.
All right, guys. Well, that was amazing. Just an awesome session. And folks, thank you all for sticking with us, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
You can find us on Growth Mentor, of course. We should probably plug, obviously. Book a session with us if you want. You can check out System, where we're both coaches, if you think that your whole company needs to go through the program. SYSTM dot. What's the dot?
Co.
Thank you. I feel like we got to do our plug. Yeah, because we'd love to keep talking about growth. If you like this, you can get more of us.
Exactly. Yeah. Or you can find us both on LinkedIn as well. Hannah Parvaz, Lisa Kennelly.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. All right, everybody, you heard it. Connect with Hannah and Lisa either on Growth Mentor, System.co, or LinkedIn. So, all right, that wraps us up.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.